Welcome, everyone. It's so good to see so many of you from different parts of the world this morning in the UK to join us for this, our second Delta Talks on Delta Lens and the Signs of Inclusive Leadership. It gives me great joy to be joined by my dear friend and colleague, Paul Miles. And I'm
Hi.
just going to say a little bit about Paul, and then Paul, I'll invite you to say other things that you want to, and then we'll continue with the slides. So Paul is the learning lead for leadership and management at the Open University. Paul has over a decade of experience supporting leaders across a range of sectors, having worked widely with psychometric and behavioral assessment tools. Paul was an early adopter of Delta Lens and has used its insights to develop further his own inclusive leadership behaviors, working with his team and his stakeholders. Paul's work focuses on practical research-based development that leaders can apply straight away, and he's keen to use the tool more widely in the future. Paul, can I pass to you to say a little bit of a hello and anything else? Like, what are you looking forward to getting out of this conversation today?
So I think I get so much out of every time you and I have a conversation, and I'm fortunate that that's quite often these days. And I'm definitely getting a wonderful introduction. I don't think I would have been so kind to myself, so thank you very much. But also, I'm increasingly understanding that inclusive leadership is leadership in the modern world. It is so important for us to ensure that every corner of our teams is able to work to their optimum and is seen and heard. As we continue to silo people in society, it feels like it's an opportunity for us to fix that within our organizations. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation and going where we go.
Thank you so much, Paul, for positioning that. I'm going to share a little bit more about Delta, and what we're going to see is there is some alignment or lots of alignment between one of what Paul is hoping to get, Paul and myself are hoping to get from this conversation as we think about what leadership is. And so I just invite everyone who is on this call. I know they are individuals for whom, they are HR professionals or coaches or people just generally interested in the science of inclusive leadership. So there's going to be a mix in the conversation of, our thinking around building inclusive leadership capabilities in organizations. But I'd also invite you to think about you and the work you can do in terms of building inclusive leadership around you. So, for those who are new to Delta, Delta is an organizational psychology consultancy, and we're global experts in leadership, inclusivity, and performance. So, what we do is we help businesses build inclusive leadership and high performing cultures using evidence based insight and practical action. You're already starting to see the alignment between what's important to Paul in terms of building inclusive, building leadership capability from evidence based action. What distinguishes us from many other businesses is we are evidence based. We think about the learning experience. We develop solutions that are practical and actionable. And we provide leaders with a strategic as well as operational insights into what they can do for culture change to happen. And so, as we go into the conversation, we're going to be talking about why we think inclusive leadership capability matters now, how Lens and Lens 360 can help leaders and managers close the gap between intent and impact. And we will be drawing on real world examples as we go through. Paul, are we ready to kick off?
Why?
Okay, so just a little bit of context. I want to kind of because Paul, it wouldn't be me if I didn't have like a little bit of like theoretical context, but I'm going to be drawing you in very
Far
shortly.
away.
So, our official definition, what is inclusive leadership? And would love your reflections as we're going through this, Paul. Because from Delta's perspective, inclusive leadership is about getting the best of all your people. It's about making people feel valued personally, committed to the team, broadly. So it's the group, committed to the group, personally valued, committed to the group. And it's about leaders thinking, what are the conditions I can create to ensure people perform at their best? In other words, in my view, in our view, it's good leadership for all. And Paul, just wondering what your immediate reflections.
So my favorite quote ever in leadership is Grace Hopper, famous Navy computer scientist, I believe, an admiral in the American Navy. She said, "You manage things and you lead people." Was essentially her call out, right? And my take's always been managing things is really easy. It's task lists, it's simple stuff, but we do get that wrong sometimes. But the leadership part is about this whole massive variety of people that all had millions of things happen to them before they started work today. And I need to be able to flex around that. One leadership style doesn't answer that. So inclusive leadership is about acknowledging the differences in your team and being ready to be the thing that moves. And so, yeah, I 100% agree. I think with inclusive leadership, I think good leadership. They're the same thing. I don't think you can do good leadership without including people in your team because you're missing out.
Oh, thank you, Paul. I love that. We manage things and we lead people. We were one of the team and I was with a client yesterday, and the client said one of their takeaways. So we'd done some work with them and we were doing like a little bit of a review. And one of their takeaways was that kind of famous expression in terms of like people wouldn't necessarily remember how you made them. People wouldn't necessarily remember like what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And so
Mm.
that client was really thinking about their own leadership style and that relational element. Wonderful, wonderful. So, as we think about leadership and we think about effective leadership, what I want to kind of like disseminate and share today is Delta is on a mission to democratize good leadership for everyone. So, making sure that everybody, regardless of gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, neurodiversity, religion, sexual orientation, age, like whatever it is in your part of the world that we start using as a shortcut in terms of, well, that person is in, that person is out, that person is, is a professional, but this person isn't. Whatever rules you use, we want to democratize leadership so that everybody, regardless of who they are, has access to leadership that enables them to succeed and thrive. And what we do is we do this by equipping leaders to succeed in a polarized, rapidly diversifying AI enabled world. And Paul and I are going to be going into conversation in terms of, well, what are the how does this impact leaders as well as the people as we're thinking about the skills required to lead effectively across difference, to manage complexity, to strengthen emotional intelligence, and to drive high quality problem solving. And again, Paul, just would love your reactions as you think about, the different sectors that you've worked in. What are the ways in which you've seen what are the ways in which you've seen leaders think intentionally about the different types of people that they work with?
So I think it really depends on the values of the organisation and the strategy. I think there's
Yeah,
some really great work Jonathan Trevor's done through Realign at Oxford. I don't know if you're familiar with his book. I would imagine there's such a variety of people here that at least one person will have. He talks about this alignment of the values and the hierarchical setup of the organisation and the way you work. And it varies around how people are included. So some organisations will do it with structure and systems and which to an extent make sure everyone's treated the same way, whereas other organizations will meet the person where they are and flex around them, which is a
yeah.
far more, I think, current view on what inclusion is. And I think
Mm.
both have their own way of including people.
Mhm.
But this second one allows you to get the most out. If you flex around your people and you have a values, I mean, I'm very glad to be at the Open University, and I don't speak entirely on behalf of the OU today. It's my full experience, but the university's values are being open to people, places, methods, and ideas. So it's incumbent upon leaders to meet people where they are and flex around them. So it's much easier to develop leaders in that environment because you've got that as your start point. It's almost an expectation. Whereas the previous organisation I worked for, their mission was more than bricks and mortar. So actually, you're almost saying that we manage things and people almost a little bit after, and so that journey, while leaders are really open to it, it's almost not as expected that you manage the person first. So I
Oh,
think there's a lot about the shadow that the organisation casts. So
yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. I hope that answered your question. I was mildly distracted while you're speaking by a lovely comment by Rob in the chat.
All right.
Covey's
Go
got.
ahead. What did Rob say? Go ahead.
He pointed out the Stephen Covey comment around good managers do things right and good leaders do the right things, which is another real favourite for me.
I love it. Thank you, Rob. Other people keep continuing, to put comments in the chat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing screen now, and Paul and I are going to build on our conversation. So stop sharing, and I will just check that everything's so far so good in terms of what you can see, Paul.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes,
It's me
love
and you, I
it.
think now.
Okay. So, Paul, let's kick off with, maybe just general initial reflections when you first came across Delta Lens.
So I can remember when we first met, actually, you were talking to me about the concepts. So as an organizational development professional, there's this concept of self as an instrument that really resonated with me quite some time ago. And for those that don't know what that is, it's this concept that you as an individual are an accumulation of your experiences and learnings and biases. And whether you're taking the kids to school or whether you are on the golf course where I spend a lot of my time, or you're in work, you will bring that version of yourself. And so the importance of you understanding the impact that has, both good and potentially negatively, enables you to make better decisions. So for me, that some of the decisions I make can impact an organization on a systematic level. And we have, so currently there's 10,500 people. I consult with other organizations and work with them. It's important for me to understand me. So with Delta Lens, I thought there was a really great opportunity for me to understand from an inclusion angle the impact I'm making. And increasingly, I'm a father of two girls, and I work within higher education. And higher education enables you to understand far more about privilege and those things. I'd kind of heard the concept, I knew I should tread lightly. And so now I'm more and more curious about what the privileges I have are. My accent, I come from Hertfordshire, so I have Hertfordshire accent. I'm a white guy in his middle age, so apparently everyone believes that when I speak, it adds value. And on top of that, if you meet me in person, I'm 6'3", and I didn't even know that gave me privilege. So I'm understanding that and understanding that it's not about me speaking for other people. It's using the space that I have to give way to others and to participate in those conversations. So when I found Delta Lens and when you talked about your concept, I just felt like it had so much value for leaders like myself to check on ourselves, because even the allyship angle is so difficult. I think
Yeah.
I can be really hard on myself about whether I'm being a good ally. And I think what Delta Lens was able to do was give me a marker. And then I used the 360 part to say, am I marking myself fairly? Uh, Probably no surprise that I was a bit too harsh on myself. And actually, it was more positive than I thought. So I found it really important for me from that self as an instrument piece to get a baseline and have an understanding and start the dialogue. I mean, people are talking to me about how inclusive I am because they were invited to give me feedback on it, which is a really nice marker to have.
Absolutely. Paul, that is so powerful, starting with seeing the role that you play. So, for example, you're talking about self as an instrument, but you're also saying, I'm the father of two daughters. I work in an institution. Um, People will look at me and see or, imagine that I have like you said, particular privileges, or will kind of take on board the things I see or say in a particular way, usually a favorable way. And I think that's so important. That degree of self-awareness is quite powerful when we think not just about Delta Lens, but just generally the power that self-awareness brings to leadership development. And I think I'd like to move the conversation on therefore, because you are your profession is in leadership learning and management learning. So how did you get into it? And for you, what is the value of self-awareness in leadership learning and management learning?
Yeah, so I, it won't surprise you to know that the reason I'm in learning and development is due to a psychometric tool. I'm sure I won't mention the one because we're here talking to you around Delta Lens. But so I was a senior sales leader at the National Lottery. I was very successful at that actually, and I've come to terms with it's not unhumble to say that demonstrably. I had a really strong success record in fast moving consumer goods and lots of positive feedback. However, I didn't feel a sense of achievement from those results. And so I completed a psychometric tool and I felt seen. So it basically told me that I was driven by developing others, developing myself, and leadership and creativity. And I spoke to our learning and development manager and said, how do I do more of this? And she said, you want my job? And so it started a journey from the incredibly well paid world of sales and operations into the much maligned and undervalued L&D career. And I've never looked back. Every day is a positive day. And that drive towards self-awareness has not left me because it's enabled me to live a positive life. I now practice Ikigai regularly. Again, this could be a 2 day conversation if I was to talk about that around really loving what I do and doing things that I value and that the world needs and so on. So um, it's been my movement into L&D as a result of an intentional move from really seeing myself and becoming aware of what drives me. So
Oh, that's I can see a number of comments in the chat about about openness and vulnerability and acknowledging of privileges. And I think one of the things that comes to mind, so we work with a lot of global professional services firms and therefore like global experts. So they're leaders in, they're technical leaders in their field, like the global expert in transatlantic legislation, just as that. And often we talk about the humility that's required despite those kind of lofty titles. So we talk about how important it is to know that you don't know everything in this space, right? So, Paul, again, going back to your comment around, well, how do I invest time in understanding the things I don't know, particularly if I'm in a context where people respect me, people love me, people maybe may not challenge me or may not, kind of give me a different perspective. And I guess that leads me to think like how does HR, how do L&D leads, because you've talked about your own example, but when you think about leaders, leaders with whom you've worked, what are the ways in which you can help them think about the value of psychometrics? Like what has worked practically as you're helping them think through the value of psychometrics for developing their capabilities as leaders?
I think I think it's understanding the right solution. So I haven't always had great experiences of psychometrics. Very early in my sales career, I was introduced to Myers-Briggs almost against my will. It was part of a group, and at the time, I wasn't that open. I was younger, still not young by anyone's margins, but I was wanting to be a sales leader, and Myers-Briggs told me I was slightly introverted. And I'm sure if people are here to hear about Delta Lens, they'll probably have had an experience with Myers-Briggs. And in my mind, that was a death knell for my sales career. I couldn't possibly be an introvert and be a good sales leader. And I think a lot of people's view then and probably even now of sales leaders isn't far away from the guy in The Wolf of Wall Street shouting at people down a microphone and the other debauchery. It's not like that. I'm not that guy. But so I was almost against them. I think the importance is understanding what's the right tool for this intervention and understanding that and helping people see themselves differently and be open to feedback and using it at the right time. If it's not a safe environment for them, if they feel attacked by their team, if they've got a poor relationship with them, then opening themselves up through psychometrics is difficult. But it's like anything within an organization. You'll find the people that are energized. You'll find the people that
Mm,
want to be champions of something. Some of them will come and talk to you in conversation, like I do.
mm,
I find this really exciting as an opportunity to talk, but also those people will inspire others in the organization. You'll start to push. I don't know if I'm
mm,
directly answering your question, but
mm,
it feels like understanding that it's not a sheep dip, and allowing people to come to the table and invite people to have those experiences, creating team environments where it's an open conversation.
mm.
It's like any learning intervention, and just understanding it's a really great tool to have to spark that conversation in itself.
Well, one of the things that I was speaking to a client recently about is we were talking about the power of feedback, and we were talking about, potentially using different psychometrics for feedback. And for them, there was a very clear relationship between, well, in order for me to develop as a leader, to be a better leader, I need the insights that feedback and other tools give me. And, I know there are a couple of psychologists on the call. I'm a chartered business psychologist. So there's something around really thinking through what is the rigor of the tool that you're using, and that will help that kind of sense from leaders, a sense of actually, yeah, I can trust this tool. I can trust this tool.
I
So,
would add, if
yes,
I can, I
go
would add
ahead,
it's
Paul.
also
Yeah.
feeling like that makes me have an opinion. I don't have to see myself in the tool.
Mm,
I have to have a learning experience and I need to be open to that. So, even in my experience of Myers Briggs telling me I was an introvert and me not liking it, my response to that is, why don't I like the idea of being an introverted leader? Why do I devalue that? Because our head of sales at the time was quite a massive introvert and I didn't know. And he actually
wow.
intercepted me and said, do you want to see my profile? And it was really changing for me, that something that I devalued in myself, and something I was almost trying to hide, I could instead celebrate and I could start seeing the positives on. So I would say even those reluctant people, it's using the tool and being ready to go where the conversation is without having to without having to defend it. It's saying actually this is you and you might not like you, but
Mm,
you've answered these questions and this is what it says
in
about you.
this
What do you think?
particular way. This reminds me of a debrief session I was having with a leader who filled in Delta Lens, like this sense of like dissonance between, okay, I filled this in, but I see myself as this, but the data is telling me that. And it was so one of the behaviors in Delta Lens is around kind of giving ownership, giving people autonomy, giving them responsibility. And we know from the research, for example, that you're much more likely to give a higher degree of scrutiny with some people, particularly people that feel that they, in your view, implicitly that they don't quite fit. So if you have a stereotype around, for example, around someone who is younger, or an implicit stereotype around someone who has a different accent or didn't go to the right
Mm.
schools, we're much more likely to like mark their work more harshly. And so that's built, like that behavior is built into the tool. And so one of the leaders I was speaking to was talking about, just kind of reflecting, just thinking through, well, it's quite an independent, it's an autonomous team that I work with, like I let everyone get on with things. And then in their feedback, as we were speaking, as they were reflecting, they realized that they probably didn't let everyone really get on with things, because they noticed that in one of their teams that they're in the one of the teams that they worked with, that there was just a little bit of, well, to be honest, I probably just, hesitate a little or check more. And then I said, have you given this person explicit guidance with regards to what they should do rather than just correcting their work? And they were like, actually, no, I probably should give a little time to do that. So
Mm.
going back to your point around congruence, there was a sense that, oh yes, I give everybody the chance to do everything, but I'm pausing and I'm thinking, oof, probably not really everybody. And okay, here are some of the practical things I need to do to adjust. And that just kind of came to mind. However, I would love to move the conversation to, yeah, like as we're thinking about congruence, so like you think one thing and other people think other things. And I think when we think about, for example, the Myers-Briggs, that or other tools, that you can find a way to think through, all right, there might be a reason why I'm acting in this way, like you said, that's a little different to how I may have seen myself. And I want to add a level of complexity to the conversation for people on the call, because one of the things we have found is that inclusive leadership is a socially desirable behavior, i.e., everybody wants to be inclusive, everybody wants to be high. And with an earlier version of our tool where we just kind of ask people different questions very broadly about inclusion, well, everybody was like, I'm always inclusive. Like we had the vast majority of scores at 70 or higher on a scale of 0 to 100, and a good number at 80 or higher. So one of the things that we did as part of our development in with psychometrics, working with a psychometrics organization, was to build a norm group around the Delta Lens tool. So now what it is, it's less easy to say, yes, I agree, yes, I agree, yes, I agree, because of the way it's been designed. And what we're finding when we see the results is we now see a range from 98 at the high end to 2. And so what's happening is going back to what you're saying in terms of experiences, like how I see myself, and we all want to be seen as inclusive leaders. A number of people are getting, because the tool measures the gold standard in inclusive leadership behaviors, that they're maybe not as inclusive on specific behaviors as they thought they were. And I just would love your thoughts on this. Like, how might this, how would you make sense of this? What are your thoughts about what leaders who find that their results are a little different to what they expect on inclusive leadership? What are some ways they might want to think about it? Just wonder what your thoughts might be.
Ooh, that's a broad question.
I
So I think,
know.
no, I like it. So I would say there's two things, right? So one, I would
Mm,
say, so I'm not an inclusion specialist. My
mhm,
professional expertise is in leadership development from cradle to grave. So first steps in management to people at the top of organizations and executive coaching one to one. So my experience of that would be that one thing, it seems EDI is much maligned globally at the moment, and there's real force and pressure on that. So there's this take that it's a nice to have to be inclusive. My view is it if you take it just from a bare bones leadership perspective, it's productivity. So why would you have people in your team that can't work at their optimum if you care about productivity of an organization? And my journey on understanding tokenism versus people really bringing diversity of thought is probably a growing one, and I think in that space, it's creating environments where people can contribute as themselves. So we have the current growth in understanding around neurodivergence and how we can
mhm,
create environments for people to work really well in their spaces. But it's understanding how do we just say to people, do you know your best way of working? How can I enable that better? How can I be the thing that moves? How can I be the person
yeah.
that encourages that? And I think that then leads to this kind of culture of I can talk for hours about best self activation, but I think there's this culture of knowing ourselves at our best and enabling our teams to know themselves at their best, so that really you're making your job easier as a leader. If I let you go and be at your best, I'm going to go and sit over here and watch you shine. I'm going to go and see you be brilliant. And if we're only working as good as I am, then we've got a really limited outcome. If I'm
Mm,
controlling that, the inclusion is a tool to enable your team to do their best work with probably the least level of input from you as a leader. So if you have a lazy leader, and I know there were organizations that used to say lazy leaders find the quickest, easiest solutions. We want to look for people with lazy, and that was I think Microsoft outed that probably about a decade ago as a real plan for their recruitment drive. But I think it's around productivity, it's around enabling people to do their own work and giving them space to do that. So I think the case for inclusive leadership is beyond it being a nice social thing to have. It's just pounds and pence productivity, and I think we probably can talk about it that way. I don't.
Mm.
It's pretty proven, so it doesn't feel like it's out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. I mean, one of the things that we were very intentional in was making sure that the tool is based on the evidence, exactly like you said, that links particular behaviors to particular positive outcomes, whether that's personal, interpersonal, team level, or more system wise. And so there's, for example, a measure that says to what extent, as you're thinking about getting the best out of your team, do you engage intentionally in consultation and transparent consultation? Not that you have some of your BFFs, your best friends there, and they're like, the people who happen to be available or who happen to be like you. It's
Mm.
about, okay, how do you engage the people who need to be engaged, whether you are connected to them or not, whether you bond with them or not, in those decisions, so that you can have an optimal outcome for the team and the performance. I'd actually love to bring one of our colleagues in because Banker and I were speaking recently, again, in the spirit of someone having a little bit of a different, just thinking through about their inclusive leadership responses, their results. And, Banker, I know you've done a series of feedback sessions with leaders very recently. And so just wanted to bring you in to reflect on what you've heard so far and share your own practical examples.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And Paul, great to see you again on the session, and really loving the comments in the chats as well. And to your point, Paul, I think one of the things that you sort of set out straight away in terms of recognizing your privilege, recognizing, what makes you slightly more different in that sense is what speaks to the heart of what Delta Lens is about, which is that self-awareness piece. And yes, Doyin has mentioned that the previous iteration of this assessment, everybody was like, yeah, I'm inclusive, I'm inclusive, I'm inclusive. And what Delta Lens has really done is to really bring in a reality check. Are you really inclusive? But not from that sort of judgmental space, not from that finger pointing space. But I love what was shared just now in the chat. Someone said learning invitations. And I think this is really a wonderful way to describe what Delta Lens is intending to do. Spotlight the areas where you are actually doing great things that make you an inclusive leader, but also spotlight some of those behaviors that could be leveraged, could be enhanced a bit more. And even just a few days ago, I had the opportunity to have a debrief session with one of the senior leaders at a global law firm. And thanks to Delta, I've actually done hundreds of coaching sessions now with senior leaders across the globe, across different services and areas. And so I know that there are tensions with leaders when it comes to this, dynamic around how do I show up inclusively, especially in the current climate that we're in. And in one of this particular leader's results, there was an area around them not given ownership as much as they could. And what was happening was there was a default in giving, work, especially high profile work, to those that they trusted, those that they were familiar with. But on this grand scheme of things, actually, their report was quite high in the score of inclusive leadership. But we spotlighted that this is one area actually that doesn't show up so great as an inclusive leader. And it took them a moment to sort of step back and think, oh, wow, I really wasn't aware of that. I didn't know that, for me, I feel like I have everybody involved to the point around transparent consultation. I like to get everybody involved. I try my best to be quite open in my decision making, but this was a blind spot for them. And so I think one of the best things that Delta Lens has been able to do, especially with the leaders we've been working with recently, is to give them a much more realistic self-awareness, give them the opportunity to recognize that this is just a learning invitation. We've seen where the gaps are now. What are we going to do about it? And the benefit of Delta Lens from a sort of me as a coach is that coaching supports them with thinking through actionable things they can do based on what they have sort of realized from their reports. And so that's kind of how we've been interacting with the Delta Lens. It's been received very positively, even, with individuals that seem to have scored, relatively low. It hasn't been seen as, oh my gosh, I'm a bad leader, I don't know what I'm doing. It's really been that moment of awareness, and the gratitude with that awareness actually is really what supports them in shifting into some of those broader behaviors that amount to inclusive, and like you say, Paul, good leadership, because actually that's really what it's all about, right? If you're a good leader, you are naturally going to be inclusive. If you're inclusive, you're naturally going to be a good leader as well. So yeah, that's kind of my reflections, Doyin.
Oh, great to hear those reflections. Thank you so much. You've reminded me of another client who said, well, you know what, actually, I got feedback. I thought I was quite open. I thought I was quite like I was happy to, lead conversations. And then they got feedback that essentially was like, oh, you talk a bit too much.
Mm.
And then they were like, oh, okay. And it was anonymous feedback. And so, just in terms of it's like the confidence that different people might have to speak back at you. That's the other thing that Lens gives you an insight into. It's like, don't assume that everybody has that same confidence to interrupt. So maybe think about speaking last at a meeting. Yeah. Thank you so much, Banker. Paul, I want to move on to, so we're talking about dissonance, like you might see yourself in one way, and then you think, all right, how do I make sense of my own report? But as you and I have discussed before, there is power in 360-degree feedback. There's a different level. And I just wonder if you could share your own thoughts in terms of, again, what you've seen as with regards to any tool, perhaps, but the criticality of 360 feedback in learning generally or in learning about your own inclusive leadership approach.
Yeah, so my colleagues describe me as a feedback evangelist these days, in that my viewpoint, and I have said once, maybe a little bit hyperbole based, that feedback can change the world. But there's a lot of science now. Dan Cable's done some really great work around best self activation and this kind of concept of us understanding how we exist in the world, as I mentioned earlier. And I think just starting the conversation, enabling people to give you feedback is the thing that 360 feedback does, and saying to someone, I will take this seriously, and that there's some investment in my own development is important. And I think when I opened feedback historically, and particularly psychometrics, I'd look for my low scores and I would look at the things I needed
Many
to
of us
improve.
will.
Yeah. And I think time and knowledge, and indeed the science, tells me I should look at the things I'm good at and do them more and understand where they are, because actually people are trying to celebrate that with me and trying to tell me I'm good and that they appreciate it. So why would I focus on the things they don't? And so I think I said to you, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, I am increasingly aware that when my kids were little, I gave a better quality of leadership, parenting, whatever you call it, feedback to my dog than I did my kids. I'd tell them off for sucking their thumb because, well, we were parenting in COVID, and I'm sure it wasn't my high points. And if my dog sat when we asked her to, we'd give her a treat. And I was like, I'm celebrating the positives with my pet dog, and my kids, I'm not giving that feedback. And then it became kind of this obsession in me about, how do I focus on feedback? How do I focus on taking the opportunity? So 360 feedback, whether it be in a psychometric or just
Mm.
in I value this, I think is just the way forward. And if you want to be inclusive, you need to listen to feedback, but you probably start by giving it. So giving people the opportunity and saying, I really want you to tell me what you think, and it really matters. And whether, particularly through psychometrics, I think there's a real value that people give it some thought, I think is really powerful. So yeah, I use 360-degree feedback all the time. If anyone emails me and I respond, it's I have a 360 feedback tool in my feedback in my email signature that's invites anyone in or out of an organization I work in to give me feedback, and I read it every week just to see if anything else comes in. And it's surprising how little that happens because it's quite a passive
Yeah.
measure. Inclusion probably comes from feedback and being open to that and demonstrating that, because the people that aren't telling you something are the ones you probably need to hear from. Like
Mm.
we talked about learning interventions, invitations, that kind of space earlier. What, a third of an organization is actively focusing in on learning, and in a really good one, maybe 50, 60%. The other people aren't. And so how do we encourage them to do it? And that's by kind of developing this 360-degree feedback muscle that it's okay. I'm not always a fan of stop, start, continues. I think, in my view, it should be continue, 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 or maybe could you do a bit of this, because
Yeah.
that matches that positive psychology piece. But maybe I'm a little bit too evangelistic in that space.
I'm with you with regards to the power of feedback and the power of a 360 perspective. And I think particularly to go back to, an earlier comment, when you think about the leadership role, when you think about the potential isolation or, only having a particular set of perspectives from people who have that confidence in speaking to you, that being very open and role modeling feedback, but all in essentially saying, I'm inviting your feedback, but also giving that feedback, being intentional about, what, I need to make sure that I'm very aware of the people around me. I'm very aware of their own needs, their own growth. And so it's a duality that encourages that culture of, okay, then I will give you feedback as well. And we were in conversation with some potential clients the other day, and one of the questions that they asked was around, well, what are the ways in which we can scale this? And I think going back to what you're saying, I love what you were saying in terms of, all right, I go back to it every day. I go back to it every week. And I think the power of the tool, with any organization, one organization that we're working with wants to embed lens into the leadership framework and then measure it, kind of give people that quantifiable data in terms of these are the behaviors, this is what your people are saying about your behaviors, and how are you tracking those over time. Oh gosh, Paul, like, we could go. Yes, Victoria's like,
You're
you
being
need
told
to.
off.
No, no, actually, not in this case. Hi everyone. There's a couple of questions on the chat that I'd like to draw your attention to, if that's
Okay,
okay.
okay.
So one of the comments from Navdeep, thank you. Creating a psychologically safe culture is key to open and honest feedback. Any thoughts on how to create that foundation?
Navdeep, thank you for the question. Paul, do you want to kick off and then I can add?
I think there's a million different angles you can come at for this one. I think I think, what do I think? Starting dialogue is probably the start point, and I would say if there's a leader at the top of that, I would encourage them to start catching people doing it right. So
Mm.
it's around positive feedback. It's almost that fight or flight, addressing that by showing you don't have a weapon in your hand and you're not coming with threat. It's catching people doing it right, appreciating the positive behaviors, and acknowledging those things, whilst at the same time, I think, Doyen, you were talking about congruence earlier. Those, if you want people to trust you, you probably need to do, say, and act the same things in a line that makes sense. And so many leaders in the hybrid space are struggling with that because they're going from 100 emails first thing in the morning to try and say they're listening and I have an open door
Exactly,
policy, or I have these
exactly.
things that they can't possibly commit to. So it's really understanding how I can show up, how I can give real time to someone, and how that consistency of messaging can happen. But start by doing right. Start by catching people doing it right would be my guess. The other thing, I'm doing it today, but I would normally say I'm increasingly finding if you're a lot in the digital space, having a blurred background suggests you have something to hide. And I'm doing it because it's very dark in the room and it somehow makes it seem better. But there's little things you can do, these really mindful things. And I think intentionality is the other bit. How do you intentionally create a space around you that people can trust
Yeah.
authentically?
Let me add, absolutely, Paul. I think there's something about seeing people, like you said, catching people doing it right, talking about it, spreading it so it's clear what it looks like. Navdeep, I would also add asking leaders to talk about their mistakes.
Mm,
The evidence suggests that to the degree that you're open about your learning, you're open that you're not imperfect, that you're still learning, that actually, you know what, you thought this before, but you think this now, and it's okay to do that. That absolutely is a powerful way in which people can think, oh, okay, yeah, I could be a little vulnerable too. So thank you
mm.
so much, Navdeep, for that question, and thank you, Victoria. Please, draw again our attention to anything. I think what I wanted to do just in the last, Paul, we have like 18 minutes left, maybe slightly more, but we're so as if anyone has more questions, please put them in the chat. Victoria's keeping an eye on them. But one of the things I want to do is I want to maybe just flesh out one or two specific case studies that we've worked with. So, clients that we've worked with in terms of helping them develop their inclusive leadership. And then I want to invite people on this call to think about their own inclusive leadership. So, Kofo, just a heads up, I'm just going to invite you very shortly, not yet, but very shortly, to please share the screen in terms of the taster quiz, and Shamoli, if you can put the link in the chat as well. So just a few minutes, a few moments. So we were working, like I said, with global professional services firms. We work with several, and one of those organizations essentially was like, you know what, we're promoting partners. We have a new crop of partners, and we want them to think about their leadership style, kind of, contribute in a positive way to the culture, and think through what can they do to develop their inclusive leadership capacity. So with Delta, we help them kind of really think through what is the high impact way to work with these senior new partners. And we created an interactive in-person session where we drew on real client scenarios, but also insights from them with regards to what their own views were. And then we invited them to think about these three levels of impact. So thinking about impact, inclusive leadership at personal level, at team level, and organizational level. And so as a result, what happened was there was a shared language, shared clarity, and it then invited us to work with other cohorts within that organization, so they have that collective understanding of what their inclusive leadership strengths and gaps are. And so for me, Paul, as we're thinking, we've been talking about individual leaders so far. I think there is such a power in that kind of collective sense. With another organization, we help them create a profile, a collective profile based on their Delta Lens individual results, but a shared profile with regards to actually as a cohort. This is how you're showing up. These are some of the ways in which the people looking up to you see you. These are some of your strengths. These are some of your gaps. So, for example, with that organization, we needed to do a little bit more in terms of inviting lots of different perspectives for people to feel a sense of being kind of part of the team and being engaged. And when we shared that overall profile, there was a sense of, okay, collectively, we're not showing up the way we think we would like to. And I just wondered, Paul, what are your thoughts on that? And like kind of building a leadership cohort, like a sense of this is who we are, this is what we stand for, and what's the power that might come from that?
I think so. So I think the question around developing one is interesting. As a leadership development professional, initially I used to think I had to have loads of inputs and I should
Mm,
really like put It was the equivalent of like if you've ever been 10-pin bowling and you're terrible at 10-pin bowling like myself, you have those little rails you put up by the side so you don't feel quite so humiliated. I always used to think I had to kind of corral their learning into a direction. And I think increasingly my understanding of culture is you have to trust the environment and trust the input. So if you're using a psychometric as your initial input for people to kind of understand and become passionate, then it's doing less as a professional and creating an environment for discussion. And I love action learning sets. I think particularly in institutions where your seats of learning, it works really well, but also on that human to human learning connection, I think there's just real evidence that says we're going to do more when we get a chance to experiment, bouncing off of other people. So I really like the idea of creating a culture. I'm conscious I'm forgetting the second part of your question, so I'm going to need to ask for a little bit more clarity. But I think if you want to create a culture where people embed it, you've got this interject of information and things for people to jump off of, and then creating an environment where people can really explore that together
Mm.
and allowing the champions of that to kind of filter through and just supporting them to create communities that sustain it. I think it when you're developing culture from something like this, you're managing an ecosystem. It won't happen overnight, and it doesn't entirely rely on you as a learning professional. And
Yeah.
that kindness to myself has come with time and experience where I've realized me doing more doesn't make it happen quicker. Culture doesn't happen quicker. You've just got to be there to catch the moments where it happens and just water them a little bit. It's as a not keen gardener, I'm entering an analogy. I'm awful at, but it's that type of thing. I now I've forgotten what your second question
Well, in some ways, you've answered it because I was curious about your thoughts around the power of the potential power of a shared understanding and a shared sense of responsibility to be to show up in this way as a cohort of leaders. And I think the point around, action learning sets and at Delta, we use the expression Delta circles, where essentially the facilitated learning sessions where exactly like you said, people can show up, leaders can show up vulnerably, so small groups of like 7 or so, and they can experiment. I love what you said around experimenting. It speaks again to that vulnerability. Okay, this has given me information that I hadn't necessarily thought about. It's now raised my understanding. Okay, I'm going to try this out. What do you people think? You're my colleagues, etc. So I think that's so important.
there is a phenomenal piece of work that's been done by Manchester Met called the Good Employment Learning Lab that is
Right,
way undervalued. No one,
right.
I don't think enough people know about it. I think it's a good couple of years old now. They did a study into what makes good management skills development, which I think you can attribute anywhere. You need an interjection of new knowledge. Now, that historically would be a workshop, about 90 minutes. It could also be a one-to-one session. It could be a session or even a group session around a new psychometric tool. It could be whatever you want. You need
Yes.
one-to-one executive coaching where you can really personalize your own ROI, that goal setting and understanding what you want. And you need group coaching. They called it pulse learning. They have a specific thing. If you're watching this, do have a little look. I think it was a really phenomenal piece of work. And I think it should be much more well known, and I think they could be making a killing off of it. I have said this to the people that did the study a couple of times if they found a way to monetize it. But if we're not developing our learning in that way based on their cold, hard, quantitative facts, then we're missing a
Mm.
trick. And you're right. If you want to develop culture, culture happens with people talking to each other and us defining those norms together. And I think for inclusive leadership to just be leadership, there is a journey to go on. I know someone's asked some questions about backlash around inclusiveness. I was focusing on your questions, so I've read the whole thing. But I think if it is just to be leadership, then we probably need to normalize it and not make it something else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Elle, thank you for the question that you've asked. And just building on what Paul has said, we have a lot of evidence that says these behaviors have a positive impact on people and organization. And so one of the things that we are doing is, but again, just building on what Paul has just said, is talking about developing your leader's capability to get the best out of all of your people. And that
Mm,
makes business sense. Like otherwise you're wasting talent. You've employed all these people and they might leave, But even if they don't leave, you're underutilizing talent. You are possibly running a risk of incorporating negativity, through like disgruntlement when people don't feel that they're kind of recognized or seen. So I would say to everyone on the call that there's a strong business case, to use that expression, for developing your leaders' capabilities to get the best out of all their people.
Mm.
What I'd like to do in the last few minutes is invite you to reflect, colleagues on the call, everyone on the call, invite you to reflect on your own inclusive leadership. So I just want to give you a little bit of a taster. So Kofo, if you could please share screen, give everyone a moment to do that, to scan. I'll just give you a few minutes, a couple of minutes for that. It's optional, you don't have to fill it in if you don't want to, but it just gives you a little preview of your inclusive leadership style. So just a little preview. We'll give you a moment to do that for those who want to.
Do we need to like sing a duet as backing music?
So we might need to, Paul, sorry, that wasn't in our briefing conversation.
That would be a really good way to clear a virtual room, I think, if I get involved in singing.
Oh gosh, oh goodness. So yeah, I what I have found as we think about inclusive leadership is sometimes, there's that sense of it's for them, it's for, those folk with power and influence. And I don't deny that. But I also love to invite people, as I'm doing on this call, to think, well, what about me? What work
Yeah.
might I need to do?
And I think it's interesting. I think it's an essential leadership skill to bring people together at a time when it's probably not been as difficult. So as difficult as this ever before, insofar as you have social media will surface you and I with completely different content based on our viewing history, and that's our lived experience. And so we assume that when you have a view on something and I have a view on something, I assume that why would you think that based on all of this stuff we know? Whereas we all used to have four TV channels, you go back 20 years, and you'd have either watched EastEnders or Coronation Street, and that was about as divisive as your channel you'd receive would be. So our job as managers is to then bring those people back together, despite all of their many differences and judgments on each other. So it is tough.
Some of you would have had the chance to complete this and would be getting your responses. And then I'm just going to share people's responses and just kind of invite you to just reflect on what this means for you. So there would be 4 responses that you will get. I just want to invite you to think through what this means for you in the last few minutes. So for some of us, we would have got a sense of we're just at the beginning of the work that we're doing. And I want you to think, regardless of where you are, what is one insight that you're going to take away from today? So if you came out as a steady starter, what is one insight you're going to take away from today? Some of us would have come out as an inclusive solution seeker. And what I'd like you to do if you're on this call is to tell one person why you decided to attend today. Just tell one person, someone who's not on this call, I attended this call and this is what I decided. This is why it was important for me to attend. Some of us would have come out as reflective bridge builders. And I want you to practice what Paul and I said with regards to feedback. How am I going to better support someone who looks up to me? I'm just going to say that again. We often get reflective bridge builders who have some understanding and some interest in inclusion. And so my invitation to you, if you are a reflective bridge builder, ask someone who looks up to you how you can better support them. There might be some people who are intentional architects based on your responses. And an invitation to you is to talk openly about what you're learning from perspectives that are different to yours. So, what are you learning about the world when you think about perspectives that are different to yours? Share mistakes, share surprises. And that's one way everybody on this call can practice inclusive leadership just a little bit more. So, just in the last few minutes, Kafal, if you can share the slide that just closes things up, and let's see if we can just kind of round up the conversation. Thank you so much. And then I want to invite Paul to share any reflections, any takeaways, and then Victoria, let us know if there are any other questions that we need to address. So, Paul, over to you. Reflections, takeaways.
I think one of my big takeaways is it's lovely to just get into the conversations about inclusion and normalizing it. So not being in the EDI space and being in the leadership space, a lot of my learning experiences and the ones I create within organizations include EDI, but without overtly doing it. So seeing the similarities is such a beautiful aspect of our conversation. And also, I think it's more than similarities, seeing that they are intrinsically linked and we need to enable leaders to be intentional in inclusion and see the direct output of that as being a productive environment and being one that actually makes things simpler, and getting leaders to transition from worrying about what they say to actually changing the way they do is probably the move where we go. And so my key reflections, I think, today are: one, I think any time we talk, I find it really enriching and enabling. Um, but two, I think there's this work to do just about normalizing and making it just part of leadership, that we need to include all corners of our teams.
I think the word normalizing is so important and speaks to the question that was asked before around backlash against inclusiveness, where we think about inclusiveness as good leadership, where you're thinking about the impact and the experience of all your people and you're optimizing for that. And so, as we're kind of drawing this to a close, thank you so much, Paul. I just want to, for me, the reflections for me are that in the world that we find ourselves in, so not just in the OU, which is a mega institution that is open and flexible and accessible to lots of different people at different stages of their lives, working in lots of different ways, learning in lots of different ways, right? So, there's a strong quote unquote business case there. But when we think about the world generally, there are people on this call from South Africa, from Nigeria, from the Caribbean, from countries outside England that are outside the UK that are in Europe and in North America. So when we think about it, the world is diversifying in many ways, right? Not just ethnicity and gender. Demographically, when we think about age, when we think about the ways in which people want to work, when we think about neurodiversity, when we think about disability and socioeconomic backgrounds. So this is important for us to get the best of all our people. And I just, want to thank everyone who attended, really appreciate it. We've kind of drawn on different examples based on our own experiences and the work that we're doing. Please share your feedback with us. And for those who are in London or are able to get to London, let us know if you can join us when we're going to do an introduction to Delta Lens Day. Paul's attended one. So, Paul, I might give you a moment to tell us what it was like for you. But just an invitation to join us if you can. Let us know in the QR code if you're able to join us if you're interested in. It will be an engaging, high impact session on the power of inclusive leadership, where you'll be alongside peers discussing it. Paul, I maybe want to give you the last word. And also, Victor, I'm so sorry, Paul. Victor, please let me know if there are any questions in the chat before I go back to Paul. Any questions you want us to address? I think we're okay.
Hi, yeah, I don't think there were any questions. A lot of people thanking you both. Gurpreet had an interesting comment which you might want to reflect on and discuss very briefly. The comment was, I have two hats on EDI, the work professional and constrained, and the other where I give my EDI values freedom to live and breathe. But surely they should go, I mean, inclusion should go hand in hand, right? I mean, there's the values piece, but also it's good for business. So it's how we convince the budget holders, to see it this way.
Thank you, Gurpreet, for sharing that. And yeah, a similar response to what we gave before, like my reflection in terms of this is effective, impactful leadership for all people. And so to the degree that we can get our leaders to think, how do I open myself up to think about the impact on the impact I'm having on all of my people? And Lent certainly gives you quantifiable, actionable insights, and Lens 360 does that as well. Okay, Paul, I'll give you the last minute to thank everyone and to close. Over to you.
It's been an absolute delight to be here. I feel richer for having been part of the conversation, and talking to you and your team at Lens is always a true pleasure. So it's a big thank you from me. I find these conversations very intellectually stimulating, and it does feel like this is progress in the field of leadership development, insofar as it's a tool that we can use to reach those people that maybe don't quite feel confident yet, either don't get it or maybe are afraid of getting it wrong. Right. And I think giving some people some sense of understanding that this isn't something new, this is just being a good human being, actually, and therefore a good leader, which the two things aren't different things, I think it's been really positive. So thank you. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute joy as ever.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you everyone for joining us and for participating, for getting involved in the chat. Thank you, everyone. All the best and enjoy the rest of your day as well as the week. Thank you, everyone. All the best. Bye-bye.